I always thought of myself as being left-wing. The more I looked into it, the more I realised, oh, I'm not left-wing. Actually, these people are crazy, and the world they're trying to bring into existence is probably going to be terrible, and so I think they should be stopped. They think this sounds like a nice ideal.
Yes.
It's not a nice ideal, actually. It's actually the end of what they claim to be to most value, which is diversity. Diversity comes from inequality, because equality means sameness. And if we're all the same, then there is no diversity. We're committed to a set of ideological demands that insist that we characterize the world through its own lens. And that, I think, is actually the most dangerous and pernicious part of this. Did you agree to that ideology? Do you agree with that ideology? You are forced to, whether you like it or not, through the strength of law.
As a white man, I've had so many different advantages which are immeasurable, but possibly had an effect on where I am today.
Yeah, but how's it unfair that you've had those advantages?
Because they didn't and I did.
How's that unfair?
I think that's the definition of unfairness, isn't it?
I don't agree.
I've just been cancelled from a few things. I can't really talk about them right now, but it's happened to me. I think I'm quite moderate. You've been cancelled from lots of things.
Not that many, actually.
Have you not? Well, go on. So what have you been cancelled from? Weren't you kicked off of Patreon? And
Yeah,
things like
just Patreon, really, is what I've been cancelled from.
and some YouTube monetization.
Yeah, but I don't know if they'd call that cancellation, but demonetization, I suppose, is a form of cancellation.
Yeah, I think so. It's incentivizing. Well, I was actually just going to talk to you about Russell Brand. Russell Brand being a key talking point and the hook for a YouTube video, but also somebody who has been accused of doing lots of horrible things. He may well have done them. We don't know. He has that personality. We don't lock people up for having a personality. But was YouTube right to take away his ability to earn on its platform?
Well, I mean, I don't think so. The man hasn't been convicted of anything, to my knowledge. He's had a trial in the court of public opinion. It's been roundly smeared. I mean, for anyone who doesn't know Russell Brand, they can look up his history and find it's quite controversial and extreme, maybe. Maybe he's done some of the things he's been accused of. I don't know. But the point is, he hasn't been put on trial and he hasn't been convicted of anything. So this is just the case of a smear job, really.
I think we do need, and this is a bit of a controversial opinion, but trial by media. Everyone always says it as a bad thing, trial by media. But I think we need the media to hold the elite to account sometimes.
But is Russell Brand really the elite?
Money, lots of money, Hollywood, big money.
Maybe. I mean, the problem with it is there's no boundaries on it, right? So at least when you have something happen to you that involves the courts or the governments, you have constitutional rights. You have a legal system that protects you, that you can use to defend yourself and to attack the people who have wronged you. But what can you actually do about the media? Not much. And the media's job is to try and poison public opinion against you, and that's to make society itself hostile to you, which actually is a really evil thing to do, because I mean, at least if the government is persecuting you, you can find solace away from the state in society itself. You can spend time with your friends, your family, your neighbours, whoever it is, and you can at least, in a sort of Robin Hood style way, get succor from the general public. But what the media's job is to poison the general public against those people, so you can't even find relief there. And so it's to kind of totalize all of society, and that's their game plan. They know that they're doing this, and they do it on purpose. And I think it's actually kind of evil.
Well, their game plan's to make money, isn't it?
Not just. I mean, they obviously want to make money, but I think that it's not a coincidence that they do the things that they do rather than doing other things that they also could do, right? Like, for example, the media generally tends to be very left-wing. Even the right-wing media is weirdly left-wing. Like, the Daily Mail will put out really bizarre left-wing stories, like it's schizophrenic or something. And so maybe the Daily Mail is trying to just play both sides. But then you've got a whole suite of the media that is congenitally leftist and will attack people they view as being right-wing in that just perpetual way. And so there's not a lot you can do to hold those people to account, because often they're quite sly with how they frame things as well. And so they will dodge around accusations of libel and things like this. So any legal mechanism you actually had, they're clever enough to get around it. So they'll put, say, something bold and terrible in the headline, like Russell Brand is a rapist, and then underneath that, he is accused of being a rapist. So, like, if they would take a court, so, well, look, it's just an accusation. We're reporting on the accusation. But they know that when people walk past the newsstands, they just see Russell Brand rapist and go away with that impression in their heads because no one reads past the headline.
See, I think I'd have to see that specific headline. I think they would be done for defamation with that.
No, they did it.
Was that the time? If they did that, they're wrong to do it.
It's not that that's just the thing, but that's in bold and centered. And so they know that people will walk away with that impression because they know people aren't going to sit down, right, I need to study, pull out the spectacles and go through the whole thing in full detail. They know that people don't do this. They know that a very tiny percentage of people actually read the articles and whatnot. But a lot of people will come away with the impression, oh, Russell Brand's a racist. Oh, okay, fair enough. And that just seeps in to the general understanding of the culture. And they know that they're trying to poison the general public against that individual. And so what people really need to ask themselves is, why am I being presented with someone I don't know and being told they're a bad person? Because that happens a lot. The Count Dankula is a great example. The general public had no idea who Count Dankula was. Suddenly he's a Nazi. The word Nazi is associated with him on every newspaper article about him. And so the general public, do I know anything about this guy? Why are they trying to poison me against this guy? That's what I think people would benefit from having just a consciousness of, because at least they would be in some way resisting the attempt to program them.
For anyone who doesn't know, Count Dankula is Mark Meechan, the Scottish comedian, comedian who taught his dog to do a Nazi salute
because it was funny.
It is funny. It was funny,
and it was to wind up his wife.
Well, yeah, and he's someone we're both. I think I'm quite a bit friendly. I'm not friendly with him. I spoke to him 3 years ago. You are, and that's okay. And he got, and that's something that I've been just talking with Helen Pluckrose about, actually. That apparently in the UK it's much more common for police to investigate people for saying the wrong thing or whatever than it is in the US.
Oh yeah, they've got First Amendment protections, so the government literally can't punish them for things that they say. Which is just a fantastic improvement on the situation in the UK, where people are persecuted for the things they say all the time. And the thing is, the police have got a natural incentive to desire to police the internet rather than, say, real life. It's actually a lot easier to police the internet. They can do it from a warm and heated office or air-conditioned office. And that's probably why 95% of burglaries go unsolved and thousands of people every year are actually arrested for posting things on social media.
That is mad.
It is mad, isn't it?
Is there anything that someone could say that you think is worthy of at least a police investigation? Sure.
I mean, if someone's, say, admitting to a crime or something, say, if someone says, well, I buried 3 bodies under this house or something, yeah, that's worthy of a police investigation.
Put that in the trailer. I buried 3 at the beginning of this video.
Feel free. But like having an opinion on things or characterizing things shouldn't be something that can be investigated.
You effing N-word gollywog.
As unpleasant as that might be, I don't think that should be a crime, actually.
Should we be able to say the N-word?
Well, yeah.
I think it's bonkers that I'm saying the N-word.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to, and I don't think people should want to. And but there are lots of things that even though you shouldn't say it, should be for the remit of the people who know you to talk to you about, right? So, your mum might say, oh, why are you saying stuff like that? And it might change your opinion and make you more reluctant to say such things. But I really find it despicable that we've decided, no, here's a selection of words and phrases, but what's worse is characterizations that have become criminal. So anything that you would characterize in a particular way that the government deems as being racist or misogynist or homophobic or whatever, that can actually land you in jail. And okay, so now we're committed to a set of ideological demands that insist that we characterize the world through its own lens. And that, I think, is actually the most dangerous and pernicious part of this. Because did you agree to that ideology? Do you agree with that ideology? You are forced to, whether you like it or not, through the strength of law.
Before we get into the nuts and bolts of this episode, I just wanted to ask you, did you know I have a new Clips channel? As part of the Heretics community, you really should at least know about it. Sometimes you're on the go, or you don't have enough time to watch the full interview, or you want to be reminded of some of the highlights. Just go to Heretics Clips. There's a link in the description, and subscribe to make sure you're getting the full Heretics experience and revisiting some of your favourite moments, such as Sonia Poulton on elite abuse and various videos about Prince Andrew, or what about Helen Joyce tackling trans rights? That's Heretics Clips. Go subscribe now.
Yeah, it's so arbitrary and changeable as well. I mean, I've talked about it before, so apologies to those listening, but I'm a linguist as well. I speak a few languages, so I'm fascinated by like how those words became insulting. So now we have identity words. Those are the ones. So N word, there's a K word and a Y word for Jews. There's F word for gay people. Everyone's now thinking those horrible words you mustn't say. 20 years ago, it was bodily functions and bodily aspects, fuck, shit, ass. I can say those words now. I can't say the C word. I could, but YouTube might punish me because that delves into the identity terrain as well as the...
But then 300 years before that, it was profanity, as in sacred words. Religious words, words about God, the devil, and no one thinks twice about any of those things. But that's where the concept of profanity comes from.
What will be next? So we've gone from religion to body to identity.
I don't know what comes next.
John McWhorter once said to me, just as a random thing it could be, climate, something to do with the climate. So you'd call someone a windmill or something, or like an oil stain.
Possibly. I think it's going to be more about the comfort of the person's mind and mental state. So you already see the R word being stigmatized.
About assault.
No, different R word, about people's mental capacity.
Okay, yes.
I don't know.
Slow in French.
Yes, slow in French, yeah, exactly.
Or late.
Yes, that's become a stigmatized word because I think it really all comes down to the sense of disquietude that a person feels in their own mind. It's about their own sense of mental balance. And I think that's what is ultimately I think they're trying to protect it, but of course there are consequences to doing that as well.
Going back to trial by media, because I do want to make this point, I understand what you're saying, that of course there are going to be bad actors involved in the media, but without them, I don't think they would have caught Epstein. I don't think we'd know about Savile. So I think we do need that media.
They protected them.
Some did, and the others uncovered them. The police didn't do much, though.
The police didn't do anything. I actually think it might be a more case of social media that is the reason that Savile and Epstein are known for what they are. Because there was the leak from an American journalist who, between segments on her show, was complaining that she'd compiled a giant dossier on Epstein and it was just shut down by the network. And this she found very frustrating, understandably so, because he's literally a child trafficker. And of course, with the Savile stuff, the BBC protected him for decades. And it was well known, apparently, at the BBC. I mean, I never worked at the BBC, so I didn't know anything about it, because all I got was the output from the BBC, which, of course, didn't come out and say, hey, by the way, one of our most famous presenters is a pedo. Actually, weirdly, they didn't do that segment on the BBC. So I don't know. I mean, the thing is with the media, it begins with a fairly noble premise, right? Which is, okay, so the Fourth Estate is going to hold the powers that be to account, which sounds like a fantastic idea. You know, I agree. Politicians, people like the governor of the Bank of England, or whoever it is, any person who has a very important position that they're difficult to remove from, there should be public accountability, and the media therefore should serve the public interest. But I don't think anyone can reasonably say the media is actually serving the public interest at this point. It seems that the media, frankly, has been captured by probably being bought off, but also through ideology, to be the defenders of the status quo at the moment. And so anyone who comes up who seems to be challenging the status quo is rendered as some sort of enemy of the state. And so the media isn't really acting in the best interest of the general public, but they are acting in the best interest of, I guess, what you could term the managerial elite, that think that actually everything should be controlled by some people remotely who know how things should be, which is pretty awful, I think.
One thing you said is that the media is very left-wing. I'm hearing people listening saying, "Oh, hang on, Murdoch owns so much of it," and I know you said Daily Mail is a bit schizophrenic, but it's not a left-wing.
No, it's not. It's not a left-wing institution itself. But The Daily Mail is one paper.
The Sun, Fox News.
That's three.
So relatively, you'd say there's more.
Far more. There's far more on the
left.
And it's normal. It's just the way the media has been for a long time. It's hard to think of any impactful. I mean, the BBC recently had to do a reorganization within their own ranks because they admitted their own liberal bias. And it was like, okay, why would they have to do that? The BBC meant to be the bastion of neutrality in the country. It's like, yeah, actually, we're really liberal, and we need to change that. And if we don't change that, we're going to continue to alienate ourselves from the British public, who actually aren't particularly liberal, who are actually really quite far right in a lot of ways. But those people don't get to have any representation. I mean, it's kind of crazy. Like, if you look at BBC Question Time, like, it's always the same. It's 3 liberals and 1 milquetoast conservative.
And Jimmy Carr.
And well, occasionally Jimmy Carr. Yeah, but whenever it's a political slate, it's always like a Guardian journalist, the Green Party member, and then someone who writes for the Telegraph. And it's like the Telegraph. That's the right now, is it? That's the entire representation right wing thought in Britain gets. And it's just very frustrating.
I get really wound up, especially, I talked about cancellations, and there's things I can't yet talk about. There's a few things have happened recently.
Yeah.
And you end up talking to people who I do think are well-meaning, a lot of these people, but they live in a world of artists and art curators and book publishers, and like this, it is so far removed from society. So when you say, the average person is nothing like these people.
Yeah.
The things I hear them say behind closed doors about, we should push this book because I know that with the marketing team who said the public don't want it, but we should push it anyway because I believe in this ideological thing about this particular trans black person who's a whatever.
Yeah.
And you want to throttle these people because you want to say, like, I know you mean well, because I think it comes from a well-meaning thing, but I want to say, like, hang on, do you realize that's what the world thinks of you? They see you as going, we know what's right for you.
Yeah. And the thing is, as well, they never spend any time interrogating why they think the things that are good, right? Why do you believe that pushing this book is actually a good thing? And they'll give you a very shallow answer, something along the lines of representation. And it's like, okay, well, let's talk about representation. Where exactly should the average British person feel represented in, say, the BBC?
Well, I wasn't allowed on. I don't know if you know my backstory. So I used to make sort of pseudo Louis Theroux kind of stuff, and then got told by every production company in the UK, about 50 of them I went to, every single one said, we can't have you on screen anymore. So we'll take your ideas.
Why not?
I think you know.
I think I do know, yeah.
Yeah, they said, we've take your ideas, but we want a minority on screen to do it. And I was like, what? So it will look like they did the journalism. And I learned 5 languages to be able to go around the world and do it. And I was like, and they were like, yeah, but we'll get a translator. So I was like, right. Anyway, that's why that was BBC Channel 4. And so I know about that. Bloody hell.
Doesn't seem very just, does it?
No. And it there was that. Have you seen that? I guess it was Colin Wright, I think, the swipe right Twitter. And Elon Musk recently retweeted it of like, here's me on the center left, and here's the far left person, my comrade or whatever, and here's the right. And then gradually that person on the far left shouting, you're a bigot, and then here's me moving to the right. And I feel that. I felt that happen. I felt that movement of like, oh, I'm not allowed in this tribe anymore.
That happened to me too.
Yeah. So what happened to you?
Well, just the same thing. I took objection to the way that the left. I always thought of myself as being left wing, but I didn't know much about left wing philosophy at the time. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized, I'm not left wing, and actually these people are crazy, and the world they're trying to bring into existence is probably going to be terrible, and so I think they should be stopped.
It has some nice ideas in the left, sort of share the wealth.
Wealth is always shared. Like, that's not their idea. Like kings used to literally give out money after looting a city to their nobles to keep the nobles happy. But
did the nobles then give it to the peasants?
They've got no choice. They've got to pay the peasants for the labor. Otherwise they won't do it. So wealth has always circulated. This isn't some sort of new innovation that the left have come up with. The left's innovation is to make it so that we'll have the same wealth. They want us to all ultimately be the same. And that's actually a really evil prospect if you think about it, because that means that someone who does no work at all is entitled to exactly what I have, exactly what you have, which is not fair.
See, I like Hanlon's razor, and maybe to the point of being naive, but I'm just sticking to it. The idea that it's not necessarily out of evil, but maybe stupidity. I mean, you said yourself you were quite left-wing.
It's not even evil. It is evil, but it's not that the people are evil. It's that they think this sounds like a nice ideal.
Yes.
It's not a nice ideal, actually. It's actually the end of what they claim to be to most value, which is diversity. Diversity comes from inequality, because equality means sameness. And if we're all the same, then there is no diversity. And this is the problem with liberalism. It is a great homogenizing force that seeks to turn everything into the same thing. And they don't know when to stop.
What do we do then with the idea that there's 8 billion people on the planet, there's a whole bunch in the UK, some were born like in a bin, and I went to a private school and had a nice life. And we don't want equity, because that's just ridiculous. But what do we do? Do we just go, well, that's your lot?
Well, I think that the most important thing for people is to feel that they're being treated fairly. Right? That's because as soon as we get off of ideological language like equity, equality, liberty, all this sort of stuff, and say, okay, but on the basis of how we feel about these things, am I being treated fairly? And so there was an example, I think it was in Cheshire, of a young chap who had looked his entire life to join the police force, and so he'd got the right qualifications, he'd done the right training, and they denied him on the fact that he was a white man, and he sued them successfully over that.
Brilliant.
Right? And this is obviously unfair. It's not fair that because he is a white man, it's not fair that because you're a white man that you shouldn't get to promote and present your own documentaries. That's just not fair. Like that's not right. And we don't need a massive ideological apparatus to come to that conclusion. Any person can come to that conclusion as their own personal judgment.
Well, if you were to strongman their argument, would it not be, as a white man, I've had so many different advantages which are immeasurable, but possibly had an effect on where I am today?
Yeah, but how's it unfair that you've had those advantages?
Because they didn't and I did.
How's that unfair?
I think that's a definition of unfairness, isn't it?
I don't agree. Just because you've got something and I don't have something, it doesn't mean it's unfair.
But I didn't work for it. I just was given it without having to do anything.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that it's unfair.
So what would be unfair?
Unfair is something that happens despite you deserving this thing. So, for example, you deserve what you have because your parents gave it to you. There's no one more deserving than the things that a parent gives to their child, right? No one else deserves my love that I give to my children more than my children deserve it. No one is more deserving of that.
But then if we flip that, the child that's born in a bin, they deserve that?
No, I'm not saying they do.
Isn't that the flip side, though? If we all deserve the place that we're sort of born into.
No, it's not that there aren't unfairnesses, right? There are unfairnesses, but that doesn't mean just because someone has something good, that was given to them through unfair means. For example, if I don't know anything about your situation, but say your dad works very hard all of his life and can afford to send you to a private school.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, he was working class and
there
worked
we go.
hard. But I didn't.
Sure, but that doesn't mean it's not. That doesn't mean it's unfair. Look, the means through which your dad acquired the wealth to be able to send his son to a private school was totally fair. There's no injustice that takes place in that line, right? And so that you have something that someone else doesn't have, doesn't an injustice make? And I'm not saying that it isn't an injustice that someone else is born in a bin, sure. But then you look at, okay, well, who put them in the bin? Like, their parents.
That was also my dad, unfortunately. He was a bit of a terror.
Maybe on that case. But the point is that there isn't a necessary connection between these two things. And so to arrive at the point we're at now and say, well, you're going to have to lose what you were fairly given for what someone else, to rectify an unfairness someone else experienced that wasn't at the hands of anything that any of the people who brought you to where you are, that's an injustice in and of itself.
It's a really difficult one. I get what you're saying, and I've thought about this recently because a friend was saying, there was an article, I think it was, I don't know if it was at the BBC or wherever it was, that most people, a higher percentage of people had been at private school who ended up going to these high jobs and things. And it wasn't that high, but it was higher than the percentage of state school people, but it was lower. It was like 20% are from private schools, even though only a few percent actually go to private schools, something like that. And I was thinking like, oh yeah, that is an unfair advantage. And then I thought, but there has to be some reason that the parents made the sacrifices to send their kids to that school. Yeah. I think we make an assumption that everyone who sent their kids to private schools is like living in a helicopter or something. I don't know. That's the thing. All rich people live in helicopters in my mind. But a lot of them probably most of them made huge sacrifices and I mean, in my case, my siblings weren't able to go to a private school. It was like a sort of Sophie's Choice thing. Yeah. And I've ended up cleverer and better looking than them as a result.
That's lucky for you.
Well, what can you do? It is a hard one, though. Yeah, why send your kids to a school like that? And I don't know what the answer to that is unless you go, well, abolish private schools then. You shouldn't have it. I don't know.
What's the underpinning desire to abolish private schools? It's not to improve everyone's education. It's to reduce the education of those people that got to go to the private schools.
Reduce the gap between...
Sure, it reduces the gap, but the practical effect is that no one gets the excellent education now. Everyone gets the same mediocre, comprehensive education that everyone gets from the average failing British school. And so what you've done in the bid for fairness through the left-wing lens is reduction, whereas through a non-left-wing lens, actually fairness could be charity. It could be helping someone out. It could be doing something for someone else, but it doesn't mean reducing someone else. It doesn't mean taking something away from someone, especially if, I mean, your case is a good example. What you have accumulated wasn't accumulated through exploitation. It wasn't accumulated unfairly. So why the hell should anyone have the right to take that away from you?
It's a philosophical debate about fairness, and the macrocosm there is my father worked really hard. His parents worked hard, and second generation before that, they were poverty stricken and just moved in. So there's that movement up the chain. They've all worked hard. They've instilled in me the value of hard work and all of those things. And that on a macrocosm is it's the epitome of fair. Yeah. On a microcosm, I'm born with a season ticket to Spurs and a private school education, and some people have a very, very difficult life.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that that's unfair. That's the thing. And the thing that underpins this conception of the world is a kind of Rawlsian view of what the world should be like. And so John Rawls is a liberal philosopher, very famous for his veil of ignorance thought experiment. Okay. He said, look, if you knew you were going to be born, but you didn't know what kind of world you'd be born into, what kind of world would you choose to be born into before you were born? So if you wouldn't say, oh, I don't want to be born into a world with slavery, because you might be a slave. You don't know that you'd be a slave. And so you roll the dice, oh, you got a 1, now you're born as a slave. And so you in the original position would say, well, I don't want to be born into a world of slavery because I might be, but all that means is that you want to be born into the communist utopia, right? Because you don't want to take any chance that, oh, there might be something that's bad. So I want to be sure that I'm always going to have exactly as how much money or wealth I need. I want, to be born into a world that's got a pleasant temperature all year round. You're gonna make up a fantastical utopian position, which will never happen, right? And so the problem with this sort of thought experiment is what it presumes is actually that you have the power and authority to change anything about the world, right? So because when you look at what you've done in your little hypothetical here, you've ascribed to yourself the power to determine, I'm going to take that person's stuff away and give it to someone else. So this is like godlike power that you've assumed that you're entitled to in remaking the world to eliminate unfairness. And it's like, I'm sorry, I just don't see where the authority for that power comes from. Where's the authority for me to take away your good fortune and give it to someone else come from? I don't have any right to take away the things that you've got. And me complaining, well, I mean, it's just unfair that you get to have the nice things you have. Well, A, you can't demonstrate any unfairness. And B, I don't think that is unfair. And C, if I then arbitrarily took it away from you because someone else doesn't have that, that's very unfair. So I think really it's the way we conceive of the world, because what we've done is approach this with sort of the mindset of some sort of football manager, right? It's like we're playing a football manager game. We're like, right, okay, we're going to mess around with the entire team. It's like, no. The team is not, this isn't a team. This is people's real lives. This is our entire country. People actually get to do things with their own life that you aren't in control of. And the fact that you can't accept that as the sort of liberal manager is the problem. That's the problem. You've got to accept that there are limits to what you can do, and they don't. And this is all of our politicians buy into this kind of framework. They're like, well, we're just going to start moving things around and take things away. We're going to start taxing you this. It's like, this is my money you're taking away. This is my labor, my effort, my heart, my sweat that I've put into getting all of this. And you're just like, yeah, so we're just going to crank up the taxes on you. It's like, that's an injustice, you idiots, and they don't understand that these are people's lives that they're ruining.
Yeah. Well, oh my God, it's so complicated. And I'm not. By the way, those aren't necessarily my views. I'm just
I know you're steel manning the opposing.
I said strong manning, didn't I?
Yeah, it's fine.
Keep doing that. I've done it like 5 times, and then had to delete it and put Steel Manning.
Yeah.
Like voiceover after Steel Manning. Why do I want to call it Strong Manning? That's probably like some weird like gay porn that I've been secretly watching and have inadvertently admitted now.
I can tell you had a private education.
It wasn't a boarding school or anything like that. Those guys. No,
Why is the soggy biscuit game always on a rich tea?
It's always what?
A rich tea.
A rich tea? What do you mean?
Biscuit. Rich tea.
Is that a type of biscuit?
Yeah.
I'm just beyond biscuits. I don't know the names of biscuits.
Transcended biscuits.
I've transcended biscuits. But is it that? Is that the biscuit?
I have no idea.
Is it a posh biscuit? Is that why?
No, it's a really plain biscuit.
Yeah. The soggy. Don't look up the soggy biscuit game, anyone. It's a really interesting points, all of them. However, it's still in the interest of the wealthy in a country, I think, to pay those kinds of taxes, because you don't want a country where there's just people dying all over the street.
Sure. And there are lots of ways to make sure that you don't have people dying all over the street. A total redistribution of wealth isn't one of them, actually.
Okay.
Well, it hasn't worked anywhere, right? Like, is California more equal due to their socialist policies? Is New York more equal? Is Portland more equal?
No.
No.
I lived in Argentina. This is when I started moving away from that. And they've had right-wing as well.
Yeah, South America's been very left-wing for a long time.
It's like ingrained in them. And it's a weird thing, because even though they've got this like far-right, they've had far-right dictatorships, they go very left. And it's a different kind of left over there, because it's like a nationalistic left, which we don't get here. We associate nationalism with poppies and army and right-wing and vigilante hunters for some reason. And on the that's just what they're all into. And on the left... not that kind of pride. It's actually, we hate this country. And it's so funny, you go to, you see how just, again, arbitrary values like nationalism, it can be either side, can't it? Or the Argentine left, just Argentina flags, Maradona, Perón. Weird.
Yeah, it's kind of like the sort of Labour of the 70s in this country, isn't it?
Don't know, I wasn't about.
Well, I wasn't either, but
I've never read books either.
I've read a few. But the sort of old Tony Benn style Labour, where it was rooted in the sort of working man of the country, but of course that's all disappeared now.
When I was younger, liberal meant left wing.
Yeah.
Now I'm hearing liberal about the right. Is liberal a thing away? Liberalism, liberal. Explain what these mean, and are they away from the left and right? So
liberalism is the philosophy that emerged in the 17th and 18th centuries that was abstracted from English tradition. So English tradition has always focused around the rights of Englishmen and the ancient and settled customs and liberties that the English enjoyed, because these were actually deeply envied by people almost everywhere, especially on the European continent, because it was long held that the King of England wasn't a tyrant. And he was one of the few kings that wasn't a tyrant. And this is what Magna Carta is about, this is what habeas corpus is about, this is what the Bill of Rights is about. And you'll notice that in each of these documents, they all cite the ancient liberties and customs of the English. And so in, I think it's the 17th century or 18th century, you get various legal philosophers like Blackstone who end up kind of codifying what the rights of Englishmen are. And then you get John Locke at the end of the 17th century abstracting that into the rights of man. And that's where you see in the American Declaration of Independence and the American Constitution, the rights of man. In the French Revolution, you get the rights of man and citizen. So it's a suite of historic and traditional rights that has been taken and put into a doctrine that then can be taken anywhere in the world and imposed. Now, what that means is that it renders every society that is imposed onto it as being illegitimate. So it doesn't happen in somewhere like England or America, and the revolutions there are actually not totalizing and destructive, because if things are being done in the way they've always done, to have someone parrot that doctrine back at you, say, well, yeah, that's how we do things. And so everyone just goes, right, okay, fair enough, that's how we do things. But if you say go to France, then you realize that actually things are very different. They've got the ancient regime, and I'm not pronouncing it correctly, and it's a very different society. The institutions that were built up in England to support the rights of Englishmen obviously don't exist in France. And so now they've got the universal rights of man, which is a great levelling exercise. Whereas in England, actually, the rights of Englishmen were like kind of like a union, like against the person above you. So you would have this almost sort of spiritual theory of the rights of Englishmen that would be appealed to against someone who you felt was doing wrong to you. And this was well supported. It was something the English were very proud of. But when it comes to France, it's a very different beast. And so now it's the universal rights of all humanity. It's like, okay, that's very different, because if you've got a particular and parochial view of rights that's centered and grounded in a historic continuum at a particular geographic location, that takes on a kind of homely, sort of natural perspective, especially as there was no one document that everyone agreed to. But in France, you instead have to simply reformat the country. And that's exactly what they did. They took a rationalist approach to reconstructing France. So they began at year zero. They reformatted all of the districts into roughly equal sizes. They decided that everyone has exactly the same rights. And it's like, okay, but nobody actually has exactly the same rights. Like, everyone's right to things is actually kind of different, actually. You know, my right to my house is not your right to my house, and things like this. And so in the French Revolution, you see the seeds of what comes after it. You see the seeds of fascism in its excessive nationalistic tendencies. You see the seeds of communism in its excessive leveling tendencies. You see the seeds of liberalism in its desire to have a much more open and less stratified society. And what this does, though, is it renders all of the world as being basically immoral. And so now liberalism takes on a crusading aspect, right? We've got to change Germany, we've got to change Spain, we've got to change all of these things. And this is what we're seeing to this day. And so the question of left and right comes from the French Assembly. And the question of left and right, the reason these things are left and right is it was a question of, should the king have a veto over us? I can't remember what the topic was now, but it's actually kind of trivial. And should the king have a veto? And the people who didn't think so sat on the left, and the people who did think so sat on the right. And so basically this came to mean the forces of tradition versus the forces of progress. And so liberalism was on the very vanguard of the forces of progress until it got to a certain point at which people felt roughly that this was where we should be. And then it kept going. And it kept going. And so now there are the people who you would say are classical liberals, like Margaret Thatcher. She's a very liberal figure, right? You can't end up with the phrase, there's no such thing as society, without being an extremely doctrinaire liberal. And she was what we would call a neoliberal now. Big fan of Hayek and various other Austrian school economists. Deeply liberal in the way that she constructs the world. But she is now a right-wing figure, because liberalism has continued to go to the left. I see. The forces of progress have gone on. And so now we're far beyond that. So Margaret Thatcher is now a far-right figure. And it's like, that shows you how much further to the left things have gone. And now we're literally at the point where we only discuss minority issues. Like, we're not allowed to discuss majoritarian issues, because that is some form of racism, that's some form of oppression. And one of the congenital things about liberalism is it seeks universal recognition. So if you have a group of people who are a majority and you have a group of people who are a minority, well, liberalism will always find the minority more legitimate than the majority, because there will be a notable power imbalance, and this will cause a differential in recognition. And so the minority becomes essentially a locus of morality because it is oppressed, and the majority will become a locus of immorality because it is an oppressor, because it restricts the amount of recognition that the minority can have. And if you're seeking equal recognition, well, the large group's always going to be bad. And so that's why in this country, all we ever talk about are minority issues, and we can't talk about what the average English working family's concerns are. They're not represented anywhere.
Can't we say, if I believe I'm liberal, can't I say that when it was where it was 15 years ago, I'm also concerned about parroting what generations before me have said, back when I was younger.
Yeah.
You end up sort of saying these things and catching yourself and going, oh God. But back in the sort of early 2000s or whatever it was, where there was still enough room to make jokes that were like funny.
Yeah.
And a bit offensive, but that's okay. I mean, I'm Jewish, and I used to be able to accept Jewish jokes. Now I'm very sensitive to them because they often come from woke people, and I'm like, well, hang on, you won't let me even say anything about anything else, and yet you're willing to make the jokes about, have you paid for your dinner and that kind of thing. I used to find that funny when I was younger. How sad The society's moved in such a way we can't have a joke. We can't. Mark Meacham, of course, was a great example of that. That's quite funny.
Yeah.
I spoke to David Baddiel, who I we've become quite friendly, but he's much woker than I am.
Yeah.
And I don't want to sort of dob him in it or whatever when he's not here to defend himself, but he seems to believe that this woke hierarchy of race or whatever, that, it's okay, but why aren't the Jews in it? And I'm going, well, isn't that like the litmus test?
Why do we want to be in it at all?
Well,
I'm not a Jew, but why would anyone want to be in it?
Well, it's the canary in the coal mine, isn't it? If there is one person who's just left out for no reason, then you go, or whatever reason, and you go, okay, this is actually wrong. Yeah. There's something wrong with this whole hierarchy. Yeah. We can't just say, oh, now we're in it, it's fine. And then all the sort of white people who are not Jewish don't get to have,
Yeah. How's that fair?
So can't we just say, this is what I want to get at? Like, I don't believe that where liberalism has gone is liberalism. Can you say that? Can you go, no, that's not liberalism anymore?
The thing is, it is liberalism. That's the problem.
Okay.
The problem is liberalism has a particular internal logic, and it operates along this logic dialectically. So you get the liberal and the illiberal position and liberalism, and that synthesize into the new liberal position, and then this continues on. And so because liberalism values, it makes two fundamental promises, which are liberty and equality, right? Liberty is actually quite an easy one to accomplish. Constitutional rights will solve the liberty problem. Equality is essentially an impossible problem to solve. And so if you have people who feel like they are marginalized, they will always be able to say, well, we're not equal, are we? And the liberal has to say, that's a good point, we're not equal. And they can always say, well, you did promise equality, didn't you? And the liberal will say, yeah, I did promise that. And so the dialectic continues. Whatever they're arguing will get infused into liberalism as it is now, and so it will carry on. And this is why intersectionality, otherwise known as wokeism, has been so successful in conquering liberal thought, because it said, look, these people aren't getting recognition. That means they're not equal. That means you're lying. And every liberal says, well, hang on, I'm not a liar. And they say, well, the reason you do this is because you're a racist, or you're a sexist, you're a misogynist. And every liberal says, well, no, I'm not that. I believe in the abstract, undifferentiated, universal, massive humanity. What are you talking about? Which is literally the fundamental premise of liberalism. Obvious nonsense. And so they are now strong-armed in saying, yeah, well, we're going to have to give Black Lives Matter everything they want. We're going to have to give the trans people everything they want. We're going to have to give these people everything they want, because otherwise I'm a bad person if I don't recognize them. And that's why liberalism can't stand still.
Oh, my God. So what happens next? How does this keep going? Can it go further?
Of course it can. There's no limits to there are an irreducible number of categories that we could categorize on. And it will continue. And you already see the seeds of it, where you've got the LGBTQ, IA, double plus, blah, 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 blah. All of these things that are getting tagged on are just smaller divisions of minority identity. And eventually almost everything will be on there. And so this, I don't think, has got any signs of stopping. And in fact, I think that if you go back to the philosophers who first invented this, part of it is a kind of Heideggerian constant destruction. Marcusean constant destruction, where the point is the reduction of what came before to the end point, where everyone has equal recognition.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Ian McGilchrist was saying that every empire begins to analyze itself too much and falls apart. Is that in line with what you're saying?
It's definitely why liberalism is able to operate in the way that it does. I mean, if we were in the middle of a giant war or something like that, we wouldn't be talking about any of this, right? If the Germans were flying overhead, no one was saying, yeah, but I don't feel we're being liberal enough.
This is the thing, because, I lived in Argentina 6 years, and I have family there now and all of that stuff. And whenever I've spoken to friends and family friends and things like that over there, it's actually funny to see a lot of the older people are very on board with the trans thing when we first start talking about it. Right. So when I first start saying, I'd mentioned one or two things, and it was so funny because I immediately was like, people were so shocked around the table. We're talking in Spanish about, and I was just like, well, it's got a bit ridiculous that they actually had to say to each other. I heard them sort of look at me and go like, it must be a language problem. He's misunderstood what he said there. You didn't mean that, Andrew, did you? And I had to gradually say, no, but you don't realize in England it's very different to what it is here. Because over there, it's like the old kind of the classic transphobia, this kind of like, I hate this person because they are weird and different from me or whatever, and they get killed in the woods or whatever happens.
Jesus.
But that happens. And not by me or my father, I spoke of before, going around killing people.
As we coming back to the, if someone confesses to a crime.
Yes, yes. In the woods. Does it happen? That's another point as well. No, so, all right, mate. And then I started explaining, but it's like, but you don't want them to play in sports with girls. And they're like, oh, God, no. And I was like, okay. In prisons and in these kinds of, and every time they were like, what? No. The point being, they are on such a different level because like half the country can't eat. This is nonsense to them. So they're just going like, oh no, you should be nice to this oppressed minority. Don't think much more about it.
Don't murder this person. Yes, I won't murder this person. Correct. But also, I don't think they should be in women's prisons.
Yeah, exactly. Once you said that, everyone was like, what? Even like the most liberal people over there. That hasn't even become a concept yet over there. That's bizarre.
There's definitely an aspect to living in the end of history, as it were, where actually everyone's doing or was doing relatively well. We had lots of money. We have peace. Primarily, and like you say, it makes you introspective.
You've been described by James Dellingpole as a leftist libertarian whose shtick is to question the received wisdoms of our time. Is there a way to convey to an audience what it is to question received wisdom without sounding red-pilled, peaked, woke?
I don't think I'm a leftist libertarian.
Yeah, I think it was a point I found on Wikipedia about lots of different people have called you different things across the spectrum.
Yeah, I have been called a lot of different things. I just call myself a traditionalist at this point. It's probably the furthest right you can go.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because liberalism was founded in opposition to traditionalism, but I think that liberalism doesn't have a monopoly on the things that it claims, and especially in the English tradition, you can find all of these things. I mean, in fact, liberalism takes them from the English tradition, and so I'm just a traditional Englishman, and so I believe in all the normal things that traditional English people believe. But sorry, what was the question?
But it's interesting what you're saying, because I think so many people I speak to about very similar things have been called right-wing as an insult and as a slur, and I can understand why one might want to sort of take ownership of that. Like, well, it's just, it's no different to being left-wing except the other thing.
Well, isn't that interesting how the prejudice is to, oh, you're right-wing, as if that's an insult. It's like, well, what does that mean?
Well, people associate it with Hitler, because we learn more about Hitler than we do about
But Hitler was a socialist.
Oh, God.
Yeah. I'm not even joking. He self-identified as a socialist. He ran a command economy. He had all sorts of abstract categoricals, and exactly the same way the socialists do now. He wasn't a traditionalist. A traditionalist is someone who doesn't think that they have a mandate for total control over society. Right? Every liberal does, as you saw with the John Rawls thing. Obviously, Hitler being the archetype of totalitarian does. Obviously, the communists do, being the 20th century being more than enough for evidence for that. But I don't think I have a mandate over all of society. Right? I actually think that your business is your business, my business is my business, and actually I would call myself a virtue ethicist, as in it's how we get from A to B that really matters. I mean, obviously it could be that you're trying to do something evil, but if you're just being a normal person and you work hard, you get paid, and you buy a house, then there's virtue in that, right? That doesn't mean that, in fact means that I don't get to take that away from you because you did something virtuous. In fact, what authority am I assuming to say that I should take that away from you? Like, again, it brings up all sorts of questions of who do you think you are? The liberal and the communist who wants to reformat society. Like, who exactly do you think you are, and where do you think you get this authority from?
Is there any value in trying to help people who were born into less fortunate positions? And I get what you were saying before, which is like, well, yes, but whenever it's tried, the gap's even bigger, though, isn't it?
There are loads of ways of helping people. Stealing from other people just isn't one of them.
Right? But people aren't going to just do it of their own volition, not in high enough numbers.
Charity used to be a massive thing in this country. Like, the Victorians had hundreds of different charities. The NHS began as a charity. Like, charity used to be one of the core tenets of British life, and used to have monuments to people who would spend huge amounts of money. I mean, for example, there's an interesting example in modern day. In San Francisco, there is the Zuckerberg Hospital. How do you think it got that name? Because it got an endowment from Mark Zuckerberg to build a hospital.
Do you see that Curb Your Enthusiasm episode where they donate to wings of hospitals?
I haven't seen that.
Larry David and Ted Danson, the actor from Cheers. Yeah. And Larry's all happy with himself because he donated a wing, and it's called the Larry David wing. And then Ted Danson's one's called just anonymous donor, but everyone knows it's Ted Danson. And Larry's going around getting all upset, just like, how's he done this? He's telling everyone it's him and all that. But it's interesting to see Zuckerberg didn't call it just like the anonymous brackets, maybe Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, but this was totally normal, and it was a part of a much stronger society. When you export all of these things to the state, then people feel less inclined to do things for one another. And this has been just generally ascribed as the sort of collapse of civil society. When you've got a civil society where people feel that they have an obligation to get involved, then, well, things can be done without civil servants.
So, okay, then what is, and we don't have enough time for but a brief, you're in charge now.
Oh, God.
I imagine, I'm putting you in charge. I have that power, by the way, by virtue of my father working hard. And so what are some of the main big steps? Okay, because you don't want people being poor and being born in difficult and having difficulties. So what would you do?
Well, I mean, being poor and having difficulties, being poor is a relative question, right? So, I mean, our poor have iPhones and they eat McDonald's. So, I mean, there are going to be kids in Africa who are in cobalt mines at the moment who say, you're not poor. Right? Yeah. So poverty is a relative phenomenon that is about comparison to the people around you. So I'm not going to try and eradicate poverty, because even if everyone's standard of living is that they're driving around in Jaguars, those people who don't have the flying cars will say, well, look how poor I am. I've only got a Jag, right?
Sure.
So that it's not about eradicating poverty. It's about making sure that everyone has a good opportunity and is not unfairly dealt with. So, for example, I think, and I'm not a free market guy either. Mm-hmm. I'm in favor of property ownership. I mean, we're at the point now where the free market is actively inhibiting people's ability to buy property. So, I mean, part of the free market, I mean, if you look at the EU's, like the EU being like the ultimate neoliberal project, really, their 4 demands of the movement of goods, capital, labour, and something else. I can't remember, wealth probably. I can't remember what they're for. But the point is, if you've got a totally free market, then money can move to a certain place, but also labour can move to a certain place. And that means if you have a rich country, or what was a rich country, like Britain, and then that labour market is open to poor countries, then you get a distinctly unfair occurrence happening, which is the mass movement of people to that rich country, and that has knock-on effects. That's the reason rent is so high. You can't buy a house because it turns out that people from elsewhere are people and they need to live somewhere and they want to get jobs, and this means that the cost of housing goes up massively, but also wages are depressed because of the job market becomes a buyer's market rather than a seller's market. So if you're running a business, you've got lots of different people to choose from. You can actually start undercutting until you get to a person who is prepared to work for a much lower wage than someone else. If you had a more narrow pool of recruits, applicants, then you would have to be more competitive with what you're offering. And then, of course, if you've got a narrow pool of applicants, that means you've got fewer people. So someone who's renting a house can't say, right, I'm going to rent it out for £2,000 a month. It's going to be only £1,000 a month. So it changes the dynamic of who benefits from these things. And so I would probably stop immigration at this point. Yes.
Oof.
Yeah. And it's the fact that sounds extreme really tells us a lot about the position we've come to, right? Because it's totally unusual to have immigration. Most countries don't have immigration.
Is that right?
Yeah, because nobody wants to go there, right? I mean, like, how many immigrants do you think Uganda takes every year?
Well, I couldn't say. I know in Argentina, loads of Bolivians are going in, Venezuelans are all going in there, but I guess Argentina...
Okay, well, how many people are immigrating to Bolivia?
Maybe Paraguayans. I really don't know.
But the point is, most countries aren't actually a lodestone for mass immigration. right? It's actually not normal to get millions of people every year, 1.4 million this year, 1.3 million last year, 1.2 million before Conservative government. It's actually not normal to have this kind of mass movement of people. And it's in unusual cases like the United States or Britain or Europe where this happens. Most countries are actually kind of static when it comes to their population because usually there's no incentive to go there, right? But we're in this unusual position where we've had this for 25 years. And so now a quarter of England and Wales are foreign born. And it's like, right, okay, this was not how things should have gone. The infrastructure we're using was built in the 70s and the 80s when the population of the entire country was something like 55 million, 56 million. And the population now is probably over 70 million. Although the census says 69 million, there are going to be lots of people who aren't counted.
Census just has a sense of humour, dirty one.
Yeah. And so this is why everything is failing, right? Everything costs a fortune. The NHS will never not be funded. Like the constant refrain with the NHS is, oh, the Tories are not, cutting the funding of the NHS. It's like, no, you can look at the NHS funding. It's this constant upward graph. The problem is when you bring in millions of people every year, a million, well, the burden on the free at point of service health service just keeps going up. And so there's no end to this. And then you go, okay, why aren't the house prices going down? There's got to be a collapse in the housing market. No, because there's constant demand. You're bringing in more and more people. So there's never a point at which that can go down because these people need to live in houses, obviously. And then the job market, why aren't people's wages going up? Well, because there's no incentive to hire you who wants a higher wage over someone who's content with a lower wage. And so these things all add up. And so after 25 years and after, I think it's about 15 million people who are here now who weren't here 20 years ago, that just has to stop because it's destroying the country. And that's not even to speak of the cultural displacement of the native peoples of the British Isles or anything like that. That is purely to speak on an economic level. The country is being destroyed by mass immigration.
There's that argument. Did you ever see that Kelly Osbourne, Sharon Osbourne's daughter?
I did. Who's going to...
Yeah. But the thing about that is, she said that, and it came out not how she wanted to say it. Yeah, what was it? Who's going to
cleaners?
Who's going to clean our toilets?
Yeah, who's going to clean our toilets? Yeah, and there was a woman on Question Time who said, "Who's going to serve our coffee at Pret?" It's like teenagers.
That's great, but okay. I thought when she said that, I felt a bit bad for her because she obviously didn't mean it that way.
Yeah,
I felt like the others rounded on her. And the bad thing there was like the hypocrisy is like, but they're all thinking it because they are super rich, Hollywood, whatever, who are just thinking, I want people to come in so they can clean my toilets. Yeah. And they rounded on Kelly Osbourne, who didn't really mean what she had said.
She just blurted it out.
Yeah, I felt a bit bad for her. And it's that thing of like, oh, no, honey, you said the wrong thing.
Yeah.
All this stuff. And they are thinking it. However, there is a bit of like people born here who have had generations to build up and build up after generations of being in this country don't want to be doing those jobs that might seem ambitious to somebody who is born in a very difficult circumstance somewhere else. Is there not, I know you're saying teenagers, but teenagers are just, I don't know, they're born in such a world that I don't see them doing those jobs.
Well, that's only because we've allowed it to happen. I mean, when I was a teenager, you got a job in a bar or a Pret or
a bar or a Pret. Toilets.
Yeah, I've cleaned toilets. Like these are jobs that you're supposed to do when you're young, because they don't pay very well. They're not brilliantly paying. They're not meant to be careers, right? But we're turning them into careers, and this is not good. And we deprive people of a kind of life experience, right? Because okay, I don't want to do that. Yeah, but you're 17 and you want some money to go out partying on Saturday. What are you going to do? It's like, well, I'll just go out. I won't go out. It's like, no, you're just going to okay, fine, I'll get the job, I'll get the money, then I'll go out and have a good time with my friends. And that'll be a learning experience. Then you go off to university and you get a career, whatever. But these shouldn't be career options. Well, these never were.
Did you clean toilets then?
Yeah, I did. I used to live in Newquay. And for £3.25 an hour, because minimum wage didn't exist at that time.
How old are you?
44.
Huh. Well, there you go. How old were you cleaning the toilets?
19.
How did you find it?
It was all right.
Was it all right?
It wasn't that bad. I mean, you've got
I know I don't keep mentioning cultural references,
No.
but have you seen the thick of it? Do you ever clean your mum's piss or whatever? There's a Welsh woman who's having a go at this the MP, and she just goes up to him, have you ever had to clean your mum's piss? Do you know what it's like? And he was going, well, it doesn't seem that bad, does it? I don't know.
I mean, you've got rubber gloves, you've got, cleaning tools and stuff like that. It's not like I had to do it with my bare hands or something. It's not the end of the world.
No, and yet you chose to.
Well, yeah, I wanted the money. I wanted the money so I could go out to the bars.
Yeah,
and my parents were like, "Get a job." And I was like, "Okay, fine, I'll get a job." It's not like the end of the world, and it teaches you character.
Yeah, I worked at kids' camps, looked after kids and things. Hated it.
Yeah,
I actually hated it because it reminded me of death. Because I was reaching that age of like 17, 18 when you're all melodramatic.
Yeah,
and every year the kids stay the same age and you're old and further away from that. And
so you felt that you were dying.
Yeah.
I never felt like I was dying at 17.
What about now?
No.
You don't think about that?
No, not really.
You're up at 3 a.m. You're not thinking about that?
No. Got too much on.
That's the trick.
Yeah.
When I'm really busy, I'm happier.
Yeah.
If I'm not busy, those thoughts are back in the head.
See, 17-year-olds were busy cleaning piss in nightclub toilets, so they wouldn't even be thinking about death.
Whereas I'm sitting there like building a rocket with a kid, just going, "Oh God, I was once this, and now look at me." And it's how long left have I got? 30 years, 40 years, and I'll be dead. But that's an interesting segue too. Where can we send people to your stuff?
You can find us at lotuseaters.com or search on YouTube for the podcast of the Lotus Eaters and check us out there.
Who is a heretic you admire? I keep meaning to send this to people before.
Who is a heretic I admire?
You can take your time if you want, and we can just edit that bit out.
I'm not going to say not pal.
Fucking hell.
It would be funny, but I'm not going to do it. Actually, I quite admire Tommy Robinson, which is never a popular thing to say in polite company, but I think he has been unfairly maligned because he was raising the alarm bells of a real problem that was really happening, and he was told it wasn't happening, and it has come to the point now where it's undeniable, and he isn't what people said he was. He genuinely isn't, as far as I can tell. I have yet to see something of his. No one ever presents any statements of his. They never say, "Oh, Tommy Robinson said this evil thing." It's like, okay, what did he say? They don't say that. They say, he is a racist. He is a bad person. He is this. He is that. It's like, okay, but what has he actually done? And what his crime is to represent working class English interests. That's his crime. And of course, if we go back to it's about representation, it's about recognition. Well, he represents a majority who are being unfairly oppressed, actually, against a minority who are being unfairly privileged. And that's why he's treated the way he is. And also there are class issues there as well, of course, because he's got a working class accent and the people he talks to get their coffee in Pret, and they hate him for it.
It's an interesting one, Tommy Robinson, because for this podcast, you're thinking, okay, who shall I have on? And you want controversial people, but then Tommy Robinson is probably him and Katie Hopkins. I know non-Brits might not know who either of those are. Those are two where you go, oh, is that going to stop future guests coming on? And then you do think, what are the things that Tommy Robinson has said? Now, Katie Hopkins, there is actually...
exactly. Katie Hopkins, you can find statements that...
some things.
Yeah. But even then, I don't think that should be a barrier to talking to these people, because it's not the sum total of their personality. But with Tommy Robinson, I just don't know what it is he's supposed to have said.
It's a bit of a J.K. Rowling in that sense, isn't it? I don't know what... You keep asking people, what is it J.K. said? I don't know. Yeah, I'd need to look into it a lot and then like really pour through it and go, okay, that was what I guess what I'd be looking for then is that hardware versus software thing. Has he said things that have had a go at people for their hardware, who they are? If we're talking about Muslims, because they are Arabs who do this and that.
Well, that's the thing. I've never seen him say anything. I've only ever seen him talk about Islam as a doctrine and philosophy and a belief system, which theoretically in liberal Britain we should be able to discuss. But apparently we're not, because the powers that be conflate Muslim with an ethnic group.
Yes.
They call it racism. It's like, how could that be racism?
Unless there is an argument, I suppose, and if we get really into the weeds, that Muslim is, in the same way that Jewish can be a culture. You can be an atheist Jew. Hitler would have come after you. Is that the same for Islam? I asked Yasmin Mohammed that, an ex-Muslim. She said no, because they kill you. That's the whole point. If you're a Muslim and you're not a believer, that doesn't work.
Yes.
But obviously everyone has their interpretation of how they're going to do it.
But the point being, as far as I can tell, Tommy Robinson has only ever been a critic of Islam, and he, I don't think, is a racist. I mean, like the English Defence League, I was never involved with it or anything like that. Yeah. But I retroactively went back to look at it. And there were it was a very multiracial organisation. There were Sikh divisions, and there were lots of black people involved, because it was just people who had felt that they had been unjustly dealt with by the Muslim community, who weren't getting accurately represented by the powers that be, who should have taken they should have actively stopped certain kinds of behaviors and didn't. So anyway, I can't find anything that actually is something you could hold over Tommy's head and say, look, this is why you're a bad person. It just seems to be the fact that he has been raising the alarm for the native English working class, and the powers that be, being very middle class and contemptuous of these people, have used him as a totem to smash down and turn into a terrible person in the eyes of society. But actually, I just don't think that these things are accurate. And I'm not saying he hasn't got a criminal record or something, right? It's common for working class men to have a criminal record against the state. But that, I don't think that makes him an evil racist or something, because he doesn't seem to be.
Interesting. Well, I don't even know what to say to it, because I need to look deeper into it. I don't know enough about what he said.
I was exactly the same about 5 years ago, and I was like, okay, well, I'll look into it. And I was like, well, what's he done? You know?
Well, I encourage everyone who's listening, everyone who's watching. Some people will get a reaction from that and say, "Oh no, Tom, go and have a look. Send me a message telling me what he's done that is wrong." Send Carl a message very angrily, telling him.
Feel free.
Send the angry ones to Carl.
I've asked people, look, send me like a clip or a text message or something like that he sent, where he's like, "I hate Pakistanis" or something like that. I just.
Yeah.
You would think that lots of people would be in my mentions going, here's the evidence, but no one ever is.
We shall see. Guys, please do go and follow Carl. I'll put all the links in the things. You can go down and do that, and keep on watching this show. There'll be similar things right here. So just watch the things.